Good evening, and welcome to Black Doctor Speak. I am Ellis Dean, and as always, every Tuesday night we are here with the enigmatic, charismatic, the problematic, and we also have with us our newest co-host, the beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
How are you both doing this evening?
I'm doing great. Great. So glad to be with you, distinguished gentlemen.
Well, it's a good thing that this is a time when we can kind of all celebrate. I don't know what your political persuasion is, but the fact that Trump is gone is, for me, a real. It reduces my anxiety by a factor of about 300. And
Yes.
so, consequently, I think that for those of you who are interested in health, I think it also means that we have a chance to have the kind of healthcare system that we can all appreciate. And I want to introduce, before we get started, Dr. Donna Carey. Dr. Carey is a very distinguished pediatrician who actually has a very large following, which she goes, Dr. Donna, walk with Dr. Donna, talk with Dr. Donna, jump up and down, but she certainly has been a very strong advocate for the health of Black people, and she will serve as one of our co-hosts. And so I think every week we'll be here talking about your health. One of the struggles that we're having, Mr. Ellis, is we're having struggle trying to find the name for our program. A lot of the good names have been taken. So we're going to ask our audience, those of you who are listening to us, to suggest some names to Mr. Ellis as we go along, and then we're going to choose a name based upon what we consider the best of what you've given us. And so for right now, we're about health, but like I say, we're in Black Doctor Speak, but we're prepared to make some changes as that goes along. So each week we'll be here, the three of us, talking about health, talking about contemporary issues. Each of us, Dr. Carey and I, have a special guest each week to talk about some of the issues that we think are contemporary. But before we get started, there are lots of things going on this week. I mean, obviously, change in administration, certainly some of the issues around the vaccine, which we're going to talk about with Dr. Randall Morgan. But what do you think, Dr. Carey, is the most important issues facing us this week? Or Ellis, what do you think?
Well, definitely the changing of the guard is an exciting bit of news that's happening this week. I'm happy that we're going to have an administration who recognizes the value of human life, and we'll be doing some things to help with this pandemic that we've been battling for over a year now. And so I'm excited about what this new administration is going to put forth in terms of their public health policies, in terms of getting some of these, getting vaccines stockpiled and out to the community so that we can actually distribute it to those who need it. So I'm excited. I think for me, that's like the biggest news that's on the brink of change. As Sam Cooke said, a change is gonna come.
I think he sung that. I don't know he said it, but
I can't sing, so I didn't want to try. I didn't want to mess up his song.
What about it, Alice? What are you excited about this week?
I'm excited about, whenever you have a change of administration, it's almost like New Year's, right? But like New Year's amplified, where you feel this refresh, this renewal, this new sense of energy that comes in. And for this one in particular, it's more energizing because of the last 4 years we've kind of suffered under, basically a dishonest president, for lack of a better term, and a narcissist. And so moving forward and really kind of trying to rid ourselves of that, I know it's going to take a while for the population to kind of refresh itself. But again, the population didn't pick up his bad habits immediately when he started in 2017. And so now we've got to kind of flush that out. So I'm looking forward to, hopefully over the next several months, as we move away from his administration, that we start to return to some sense of normalcy. So that's what I'm looking forward to over these next few months.
Yeah, well, I agree with both of you. Those are very top of mind issues. I am concerned about the fact that if those of you who have other conditions like cancer, or diabetes, or asthma, or even just general medical checkups for yourself and your children are still adhering to your medical protocols. I mean, don't just because the coronavirus is taking up all the oxygen, don't give up on those things. If you've got a chronic condition, make sure you're connected with your healthcare system. Make sure you're asking the questions when you feel unusual. Make sure you're making those kind of connections as well. I'm also concerned about the whole issue around the corona vaccine. I think that when we were talking about a vaccine, we were led to believe that everybody who wanted one would get one tomorrow. What happened is that it's been a very slow kind of a process. In addition, there are other vaccines out there. And I think that we need to start to think about how those are going to be examined and how those are going to be rolled out.
Right.
But who better person to talk about that than Dr. Randall Morgan? Dr. Morgan is the CEO and president of the Montague Cobb Institute of the National Medical Association. He is an orthopedic surgeon with too many credentials for us to have time to mention. He is now living, for many years was in the Gary, Indiana area, and for some reason, he's moved to Sarasota. Now, I went down there to visit him one time. It was obvious to me why he had moved. A beautiful community, but that has not stopped his commitment to to how things work in our community. And the Montague Cobb Institute is a research institute of the National Medical Association, very distinguished group of scholars associated with that, probably one of the only major African-American health think tanks in this country. And Dr. Morgan is personally and certainly professionally responsible for much of its success. But he has been involved, along with other people, in the whole issue of vaccines and the whole issue of research and involving African-Americans in clinical trials. Dr. Morgan, welcome to our program.
Thank you very much, Dr. LeNoir, and it's a pleasure to be on the program with you.
Now, I always thought that, when I had a lucky streak, it would continue. I was lucky enough to get the vaccine early because I personally believe that the vaccine is right for me. But then I find out that, there may not be enough vaccine for me to get my second shot. Now, how much vaccine is really available?
Well, we'll find out, because even the Biden administration doesn't really know how much vaccine is available because of the horrible transition situation which has just taken place. We at the Cobb Institute have had the opportunity to work with members of the Biden-Harris transition team, and particularly the health transition team. And we feel that there is a lot of vaccine that simply has not been deployed to the states as it should. But I think we have to remember that there's a lot of the vaccine as well that's been produced that was promised for international delivery. And so I think that is slowing down the process of providing vaccine for all of our states.
There's some issues around the vaccine that I don't think people have answers for. For instance, if I get this vaccine, certainly I get the shot. How long will my immune status be affected?
Well, that's another question that we don't know. We know that the trials have been going on for about a year. And so there's been no reason to believe that the vaccines are ineffective, as these patients who have been in trials over this period of time have not shown any negative effects. So I think we're hoping that at least it will be an annual vaccine. But the latest data that I saw from the New England Journal of Medicine is that it's a I don't know question at this point.
Another question I have is, how long before we get the vaccine will Dr. Carey be able to return to her normal life? The church, obviously, very important to her. The jazz concert is very important to me. The Golden State Warrior athletic contest. How long, once I get the shot, will I be able to kind of prance right back into the normal patterns that I have?
The short answer is no. First of all, you need to have both of the shots, not one. And I must tell you that I received my second shot today at the hospital. So I should feel like Superman, but I still have my mask and I keep my distance and I wash my hands and not going into many of the social environments. Have not been in a restaurant for a sit-down meal since March. So I think, in all honesty, we have to look at a 12 to 18 month period of continuing our pandemic prevention strategies, with or without the vaccine.
Now, let me ask you, now, right now, everything is free, but eventually I'm certain that once, this becomes a more routine thing, will people have to pay for this vaccine?
They may have to pay nominally. I think anyone who doesn't have the means will be able to receive the vaccine. And I certainly think that will be the case as long as the pandemic exists. So I think the charge for the vaccine is not going to be the issue. The charge is going to be vaccine acceptance and trying to get the vaccine deployed to as many people in United States as we can, as quickly as we can.
All right, one of the more sensitive issues that we talk about, and certainly the issue that the Montague Cobb Institute is involved in, is this whole issue of clinical trials. There's still some vaccines out there that are one-shot vaccines that work differently from the ones that we're using right now. The Cobb Institute is interested in increasing the number of African Americans in clinical trials. Now, we've got this history, 400 years of experimentation culminating in the Tuskegee experiment, which most African Americans are concerned about. So tell us a little bit about clinical trials and why African Americans should be involved in those.
Well, clinical trials provide us with the opportunity to understand whether a vaccine or any other type of medication is safe and whether or not it's effective for the purpose for which it's given. So in this case, is it effective in protecting us against the COVID-19 infections? And it certainly seems, based on the preliminary data from Pfizer and Moderna, that a 95% effectiveness rate is how it's measured. And so we're encouraged at this time that those clinical trials gave accurate information and gave good information. And so, as you mentioned, there are other vaccines that are in trials at present, probably about 4. And within the next month, it's predicted that 2 will be given emergency use authorization. So we need all the vaccines that we can get in order to get those vaccines out, as you asked in your first question.
But why should African Americans be involved in it? With our history of being misused, abused, not treated well, I think there are a lot of concerns about clinical trials. And why would you not encourage, but explain to African Americans about the possibility of getting in clinical trials?
Well, so first, the short answer is that we are in the midst of a pandemic, and this is a life or death situation. And so it is imperative, I think, that everyone take the vaccine in order to save their lives and save the lives of their families. Now, with regard to African Americans, we've had a history of being very poorly represented in clinical trials. Less than 5% for most pharmaceutical clinical trials have been populated with African Americans. And so the goal with the COVID-19 vaccines is to have at least 10% and closer to the 13 or 14% of African Americans that exist in our country today. And in order to know that these vaccines are safe for African Americans, to know that they're effective for African Americans, and to know that there are no severe complications for African Americans. We have to have African Americans participate in the trials at the 10 to 13% range. And so the Cobb Institute is working very hard to educate our community about the vaccines, about the vaccine trials, the importance, and trying to increase the number of African Americans who volunteer to participate in clinical trials.
You know, there's some misconceptions about clinical trials. I mean, and I think that pose barriers for African Americans being involved in them. One is, what's the advantage? What are some of the advantages of being in the trial? I think many people often felt that in this particular trial, you either get the vaccine or no vaccine. So why should I join a trial like that?
Well, I think when we talk about COVID-19, you'll be a hero if you participate in the clinical trials. And there are many of the physicians actually who have volunteered to be in the clinical trials, and particularly physicians of color. So I think that is really important because we are going to make sure that the vaccines are effective and safe for people that look like us for generations to come. And so this is a great opportunity. With regard to cost, this is many of those who participate in clinical trials receive compensation for their travel and for their time, but also receive excellent medical care while they are in the trial, because all of their medical needs are met, their history is studied, all the tests are done preliminary to the trials. And so anyone who's had difficulty with insurance in the past should jump to the opportunity to be in a trial, and particularly as they have been shown to be safe.
Yeah, I think that one of the things I want to be clear to our audience is we're not really out here soliciting people for the clinical trial process. We're talking just simply about the fact that these trials come on all the time. And every time they have a full number of African Americans, then the drugs get out there and they get out there, and we find all of a sudden for a certain race of people, there are some disadvantages to these trials. And so somebody has to take a hit for the team. Somebody's got to get in there and say, look, this is a different vaccine. Maybe it will save African Americans. Clearly, there's a bit of a risk, but there are some compensation issues, and you do get good medical care. But we're not trying to get you into a trial. We're just trying to explain to you that that is an option for people who are more than willing. In fact, what happened when these other two vaccines that many of us are taking is that there were some African Americans at the beginning of the trial because they wanted to be on the front lines of trying to provide opportunities for us to be safe with these vaccines. So I do think that I want to make plain, and I don't you want to get something and you're trying to push. No, we're not. We're trying to explain to you and give you all the information that you need to make good decisions. And I'm not going to apologize for that to you or anybody else. I want you to have information. What about now, maybe Dr. Carey can chime in on this. What about trials for children? I saw in the paper that they are starting to have trials for children. Donna, why not before this?
Well, we haven't had trials for children before this because we don't like our kids to be, out there on the front lines of things. We like to make sure that they are safe and have been shown to be safe for adults first. So we always allow adults to have clinical trials first. I believe the Pfizer vaccine had their youngest participant, which was 16 years old. And so we know it from about 16 years old and up. The two vaccines that we currently have available are safe, but we're starting to enroll in younger. So it'll be, less than 16, older adolescents, then finally elementary school kids. And then ultimately, after it's shown to be safe in children, the age group will get younger and younger and younger until we get down to, hopefully, at some point, newborns or at least infants.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to realize that even though you may get the vaccine, you may still be a carrier for the virus.
Yes.
It may modify your disease, obviously it does. And so you may go into your house, your grandma's house, your aunt's house, your favorite uncle, and you may still be carrying the virus. So we need all the vaccines that we can get for those people who have decided to get the vaccine.
Right.
What bothers me now is that we got lots of people who, and I think a lot of people are just waiting to see what happens. But
Right.
when they want to get the vaccine, if they want to get it, I want to make certain that they have the opportunity to get it. If you don't want to get it, we understand that. We respect that. And we're prepared to treat you for whatever happens. But I think for those people interested in the vaccine, I think this is a good opportunity. Dr. Morgan, for more people who want to know more about the program of the Cobb Institute, where do they go?
Well, we have a website, and the website is www.thecobbinstitute.org. And we also have the social media that is available as well. And we have a lot of information on the Cobb website that has been shared from CDC, from CoVPN, which is the Consumer Network for Vaccine Education, and some of the pharmaceutical companies as well. So people can certainly use the Cobb website, the website of the National Medical Association, and the website of the respective companies, particularly Janssen or Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, Moderna, and Pfizer.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Morgan, for taking your time to explain that to us, to talk about the very well-respected Montague Cobb Institute, probably one of the premier think tanks on Black health, and those people interested in finding more about our subject should certainly do that. One of the questions I want to ask our audience is, many of you have been vaccinated already, and what are some of your experiences? If we have time at the end of the program, Mr. Ellis, let's see, Mr. Dean, let's see if we can kind of get those in. All right, the next part of our program, I'm going to turn over to Dr. Carey, although I may be probably the most experienced person to take on this subject.
Real quick, Doctor, there was a question for Dr. Morgan that I promised Patrice that we would get asked. She's asking, why are we hearing that people are still dying from COVID that have been vaccinated?
Well, because vaccines are for prevention, not necessarily just for the infection, but for the serious illnesses and hopefully death. But if one has COVID, vaccines will not affect them. They have to have the various medications that have been developed heretofore to try to treat the vaccine. I'm sorry, try to treat the COVID-19 infection. And that's a very important point, because we don't know whether the vaccines will treat the infection so to not allow individuals to become infected. So at this point, the vaccines are not going to be effective in making sure that someone who has COVID does not pass away.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Patrice. When they mention these vaccines, they talk about effectiveness. I mean, when they say that's 95% effective, or it's 85% effective of the Chinese vaccine, which is 78% effective, that means that the difference, it means that it's not effective in certain people. So it's 95% effective. That means 5% of the people are not going to be affected by the vaccine. The other thing is that you take 5% of 1 million people, that's still a lot of people. Right. There are also some people who had side effects from the virus, even in the trials. And so consequently, that's a very good question. But when they tell you it's 94, 95, 75% effective, that still leaves the balance of people for whom it is not effective. But that's a very, very good question. Any other questions?
I have a question for Dr. Morgan.
Yes.
I think a lot of people are nervous or hesitant about taking the vaccine because they feel like it was developed so quickly. What do you have to say to those people who think that the vaccine was developed too quickly, and so therefore there's maybe something wrong with the vaccine?
Well, I think that what people need to know is that the development of the vaccine probably took 6 or 7 years because it was actually from the Ebola virus work where the structure of the vaccine was actually developed in the early stages. And so there has been research that's been ongoing ever since the Ebola vaccination process that has helped to speed up the availability of this vaccine, where otherwise it would have taken probably a good 3 years to develop as it goes through the normal processes. The second point is that there have been some layering as some of the pharmaceutical companies have described. They've begun production on the vaccine even before the vaccine went to emergency use, willing to take the chance that the vaccine would be safe. So that also helped to decrease some of the time to availability. So I think the other point, of course, is that because of the pandemic, 2 vaccines have been made available as emergency use authorization, but each of them went through over 90 days of phase 3 trials and were felt to be effective and safe by the FDA and all others who have reviewed the vaccines.
Yeah, and you can explain it kind of this way. As an immunologist, I explain it this way. It's like the trunk, it's like a tree. A tree is a trunk, a tree has branches. The only difference between this coronavirus and other coronaviruses is in the branches. They've developed vaccines against the trunk for a long time. And if you can bring the trunk down, you can bring the tree down. And so this research on coronavirus didn't just start with this pandemic. It's been going on for a number of years. And so they were out of the blocks before. And consequently, I think that's one of the reasons they were able to come to it so fast. The other thing is with the development of other vaccines, they couldn't see the genome. They couldn't see the pattern of the virus because the technology wasn't available. Now you can look at the virus, see its pattern, see where it's infectious, and you can target those things. So really, I think those 2 phenomena, the fact that they've been working on the coronavirus for a long time, and they can see the genome from the day one, I think that really sped up the process of the virus. So thank you very much, Doctor. Is there another question else, or would that be the major one?
Well, there were just other questions about, allergic reactions, adverse reactions, side effects, things of that nature. I think the last question for you, Dr. Morgan, is why is it that there are, like the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine are 2-dose vaccines, and then these next wave of vaccines are 1-dose vaccines? So what's the difference between a 2-dose vaccine and a 1-dose vaccine?
Well, the first 2 vaccines are messenger RNA vaccines. And not to get technical, the point is that they are developed in a different way than the second 2 vaccines that are still in trials. Those are called viral-based, attenuated virus-based vaccines. And one of them is the AstraZeneca, and the other is Johnson & Johnson. And so the trials were conducted with 2 vaccinations, 2 shots, and the effectiveness rate jumped significantly after that second injection to 95%. Really, the only one that is a single dose that is still, actually it's just completed trials, is called the Ensemble 1, which is Johnson & Johnson. It is a single dose. And the effectiveness rate has not been released yet. So most are guessing that it's probably around 80%. But that vaccine is one that's not quite as sensitive in terms of having to have it cold as the Pfizer vaccine. The cost is less, and it is safe safely and effectively used in populations where sometimes people won't come back for a second vaccine. And so that company feels that those are the advantages of the one injection vaccine. But really, that's the only one at this time that's a single dose vaccine that's been developed.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Morgan, for joining us. I think that a lot of good information. We're still looking at a pandemic with 27 million people, 400,000 people died, and they're expecting that that number may go to 5,000 a day or 500,000. So consequently, at least we are trying to stem the tide with something, and we appreciate your involvement. All right. So the next topic
Thank
is
you.
sex, culture, and gender. Now, I should have probably taken this topic, but I don't know the science of it. I have a sense of it, but I don't know the science of it. So we're going to turn our program over to Dr. Donna Carey, and she's going to introduce our guest and talk a little bit about these subjects.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Mike. So I know we're going to pivot from coronavirus, and we're going to talk a little bit about intimacy and the mind-body connection. Particularly during this pandemic, we recognize that because of anxiety and stress, that may have affected people's relationships. And so we have with us Dr. Renee Hilliard, who is, hi, Dr. Renee, who is, apart from also being my girl, who is an accomplished OBGYN, who spent over 20 years practicing as an OBGYN, and then decided to take a move and got certified as a somatic coach. And she now spends her time counseling Black women about the cultural effects of conditioning and their sexuality firsthand. So, Dr. Renee, welcome to our show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So let's talk a little bit about your background and sort of how you got interested in somatic coaching.
Yeah, so I grew up here in the Bay Area. I'm from a medical family. I'm a third generation physician. So my sister and both my parents are doctors, and my grandfather was. And I have multiple cousins that are in medicine. So medicine felt like a natural, avenue for me to take. And I was really interested in science and biology. I majored in psychobiology and neuroscience at UCLA. And then I went on, to University of Michigan on a full ride scholarship. I was, brilliant. So, it was kind of natural for me to go.
Okay.
Good deal.
And
Should I be here? Should I be here right now? I got
I don't know. I think we could all leave.
some kind of way right about now.
So I went to University of Michigan, and I studied OBGYN was my field. So I went to Atlanta, and I did my training in OBGYN. And then I came back to the Bay Area about 20 years ago and started a private practice. And I loved it at first, so I was thriving in practice. I did well. I was a what I considered, a good doctor. I took good care of my patients. I was a good surgeon. And so, for 15 maybe years, I was really satisfied at it. For about 3 years, I wasn't so much. And then the last couple of years, it was kind of a strain on me. Part of it was the lifestyle, just, being up at 3:00 in the morning and rushing to the hospital in the middle of the night. It was hard to maintain my own relationships. It was hard for me to be connected to people who understand that kind of lifestyle. And the other part of it was just, it wasn't new anymore to me. It was kind of like, okay, this is becoming burdensome. And I wasn't taking very good care of myself, so I wasn't doing the things I love to do. I love to cook, but I couldn't cook because it's like at any minute I got to run to the hospital. So, I wasn't doing those kinds of things. I wasn't pursuing music and being out in nature and all the things I love to do because I couldn't go very far. I was kind of tied to my phone. So, going on, I actually decided not to do OB anymore. And that was the part that I really loved. But because of the lifestyle, it was just impacting my life in a way that I could, project 20 years forward that this is going to really negatively impact my own life. And so I had to make the difficult decision to stop doing OB. And then I did GYN only for a couple of years, and I did some aesthetic medicine to balance it out. But I liked it. I like surgery. So I took training in robotic surgery. So I was doing a lot of that. And then I started noticing once I was doing only GYN that I had a lot of patients coming to me with sexual issues and intimacy issues, relationship issues. And I was the kind of doctor that would sit down and try to figure out what was going on socially with the person and really try to help them. But I realized I didn't have a lot of training in that sort of thing. So I went looking for more training. I'd read a number of books for both myself and for my patients, and I was referring people to therapists or, giving them books to read. But I realized that I needed more training myself to be able to support people in the way that I wanted. And that's when I went into the somatic coaching program.
Great. So you took your OBGYN practice and you became involved in intimacy and relationship coaching. But what exactly is that? What is somatic coaching? What does that mean?
Yeah. So somatic means the body. So this type of coaching is based in the body. And when you think about, how we hold trauma or wounding that we have from our childhood upbringing, from, child abuse, from, sexual abuse, all sorts of things, that information and that trauma is stored in the body, in the nervous system, in the deep parts of the brain and in the body. And in order to release those traumas, you really need to go into the body to find out where the wounds are stored and give them enough support so they can be released. And modern psychotherapy recognizes this. There's somatic psychotherapy arms that train in this type of practice where you're going into the body to release trauma. And the somatic coaching is similar, but it pulls from modern psychology and from some of the ancient traditions that really recognize that moving the body, using sound therapy, music, dance, also breath work, using the breath to be able to move trauma out of the body was really important in being able to get satisfactory results and helping people.
Do you think that we do a good enough job right now in Western medicine really talking about the mind-body connection? We know right now in the midst of this pandemic, a lot of people are increased in depression, increase in anxiety, increase in stress. And, have you seen that impact relationships and their ability to be intimate with their partners or and developing those type of relationships?
Yeah. I think we all recognize that there is this mind-body connection and that stress really impacts disease. It impacts everything from the nervous system to the immune system to mental health to, whether somebody recovers from cancer or a heart attack, a stroke. So I don't think that it's a mystery or unknown that we realize that the mind does influence the way that the body works, but we may be at a loss in the medical field of how to help people with being able to support their mind in helping their nervous system release traumas and thrive in that way. So I didn't get a lot of training in it in my conventional medical training. I know most people didn't. So I don't think that we believe that it's not important. We just don't know how to support people best that way.
So what do you do with some of your patients? How do you support them in making that connection and sort of working through some of their past trauma?
Yeah. I've been surprised to find out how much we are just walking brains. When I ask people to even scan their body for how their feet feel, they're like, I can't feel my feet. Are they attached to my body? So, even just developing awareness of the body, and all of us in medicine recognize, people will come in to see us and we're like, how did this person let this get this bad? Before they came to seek help. And it surprises us a lot of times because there's obvious things going on with people that, have gotten to advanced stages because they ignored it for so long. But a lot of people are just so not aware of their bodies. So the first, visits with people, it's really just helping them just become aware of their sensations, just getting quiet enough and getting still enough and slowing down enough to really scan the body and even feeling the body. And then once we build that connection, then learning how to identify trauma in the body. And, trauma is usually held in the body in tension, contraction. A lot of times people say it feels like I have a tightness in my throat or, tightness in my chest or my stomach or something like that. And then there are ways that we can work around releasing that. So using the breath is a really powerful tool in getting energy to be released from the body to lift disease or, I always say dis-ease causes disease. So if you can release the dis-ease within your body, it helps to reduce the chances that that's going to go on to cause disease.
Yeah, and a lot of this dis-ease comes from just our upbringing, right? Like,
Yeah.
we talk a little bit about, how we as Black women are brought up in this country and how that might contribute to the dis-ease of our bodies.
Yeah, for sure. There is there's a greater amount of uh, trauma to Black women's bodies in this culture. It just is, so, we hear the quotes of 1 in 3 women will be sexually assaulted in their lifetime. It's 60% of Black women, which, it's ludicrous that most Black women in this culture are going to be sexually assaulted. That's just fact. So a lot of people don't report. A lot of people, they're discouraged from reporting. We don't want to tear up the family. We don't want to embarrass the pastor or whatever. These things happen in our culture. The other part of it is really around the conditioning in the church. So churches are very supportive, and they do so much for the Black community, but a lot of the negative conditioning around sexuality comes from the church. So there's this idea that the body is a temple except for the sexual organs. There's this, that's the part that doesn't belong in the temple, or sex is only for procreation but not for enjoyment. And so a lot of people are off put by those kinds of messages. But also, if sexuality, if there's an unintended pregnancy, the shame generally goes on the woman or on the girl, and that needs to change. The safe sex practices sometimes don't happen because people are afraid to get condoms because they don't want to admit that they're having sex. So these kinds of discussions need to happen in order to protect ourselves and keep ourselves safe. But the other part of it is that most sex happens for pleasure, and we don't talk about that. We talk about sexually transmitted infections, how to prevent those and treat those. We talk about sexually related cancers. In gynecology, most of our training is about surgery, about preventing STDs or treating them, treating other infections, but not a lot of training goes into increasing pleasure or helping people thrive sexually. I think that's the discussion that needs to happen to get people thriving and functioning optimally.
Yeah, so I know you mentioned church several times. I know Dr. Mike is sitting there smiling.
I'm just gathering it in.
We are not anti-church on this program, but it is important for us to recognize the culture in which our Black women are being raised in and what kind of impacts our health. We know Black women have high incidences of disease, and this mind-body connection makes a difference.
I do think it's really important to separate out the concept that most of the time when we as doctors talk about sex, we're really talking about disease. We're never talking about the issue of what the sociologic impact is. We're never talking about generally sexual problems. Black men are not likely to share those so easily. And so I think kind of making it real, bringing it out in the open, making it fun is what we're all about on this program. And so I'm interested.
Yeah, I think, I did a fellowship in adolescent medicine, and one of my favorite topics is to talk about sex with my teens, because I think it's important for them to hear truth, right? Like to hear the real story behind sex, to talk not just about the diseases of sex, but how to have pleasure in sex, but also how to protect their bodies, how to say no, how to be empowered as Black women. What do you tell your clients about things like that?
Yeah, I'm so surprised at how many Black women, especially, they think of sex as something that they offer to somebody, that it's for somebody else's pleasure. It's not about them. Even when I'm trying to help them have more pleasure at it, this is like, well, I just want to function for him, and I, we have to change the narrative. No, you're important. You get to have pleasure. This is about you too. And part of the problem with you receiving pleasure is that you don't think that it's your right to receive pleasure, or that's not your goal. You're trying to perform for somebody, or you're trying to bring pleasure to somebody else. A lot of men have the same issue, but I've worked primarily with women. I have worked with men too, who their narrative tends to be something around, I think sex does harm to women. So when I'm having sex with strangers, it's okay. But if I love the person, I don't want to do that or defile a woman that I love, and those are our cultural narratives that we're given, and they run deep, so even in the mind, we may think something differently, but if it runs deep in your system, it's hard to unravel that without going into the deep parts of the mind and deep into the body to figure out where those messages are held so that you can unravel them and bring in a new narrative. The other thing is around emotional, releasing toxic emotions, but also learning emotional expression and learning communication, effective communication with partnerships. I see a lot of people who see partners as adversaries rather than allies. And so there's this, back and forth, he said, she said, or, she said, kind of thing going on. And never does it occur to them that this is their partner. They're on the same team. It's like we're all trying to win, but nobody's trying to, bring peace about. So, just kind of changing the mindset around those kinds of things is really helpful and helps people feel more supported and loved and helps them thrive in relationships.
All right. I don't know, Ellis, I want to stop and see if there's any questions for Dr. Hilliard, or if you have questions.
I think the one thought that I had when we were talking about, I had thought about suppression, right? So we're suppressing those impulses, we're suppressing those nerves, we're pushing it down. Your body's releasing, and that's why you get those tensions and those diseases from the dis-ease, because the impulses aren't going away. You're just suppressing it, and then it can manifest itself in many different ways. For men, I can see that becoming aggressive, and so that's how we have, especially with black women, and so they become much more aggressive because you suppress those sexual impulses. I think we become embarrassed by talking about our sexuality and pleasure, so that's how we suppress it in our own lives, in our own ways, and so therefore it's still going to come out, and we don't talk about pleasure, and so then we have this experimental phase that we go through where we become promiscuous or all of those type of things, kind of unnatural or really extreme sexual behaviors, because we haven't normalized the pleasure seeking and how we can connect that mind body to sexual activity. Hey, I know my mother was watching this program, so I saw her in the chat room, and I was like, we never had a real conversation. From as an adult, never had a real conversation with either one of my parents. A healthy conversation about sex. It was just kind of like you learn from your friends, and you fumbled around until you figured it out. And that's
and not only that, I think people will be very much surprised at how little training physicians get in sex, and yet they give a lot of counseling. And usually what they do is they counsel from instinct, from their own experience,
right?
Not from anything scientific. And I think that too often it's not a comfortable environment for people to talk about sex with their primary care physicians. And when they do, it's usually their own personal philosophies, and don't realize that there are special people like Dr. Hilliard with experience in doing this that can do a bit of a better job.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Dr. Hilliard, you have both individual counseling and you also have group sessions where you bring Black women together. Can you talk a little bit about your two paths, or maybe there's even more paths to being one of your patients, but tell us a little bit about what your practice is like.
Yeah. So I do offer both options. So I have an upcoming group in February that's a 6-week group program, weekly group connection with Black women exclusively. It's called Let Me Be. And one of the challenges that a lot of Black women have is around rest and just allowing themselves to be, guard down, let all the stress go kind of thing. We're told from very young, you got to be moving all the time. You got to be busy, just doing everything, have this endless to-do list. So that's one of the challenges I find with a lot of Black women that they're like, I don't have time for sex. I got too much other stuff to do. I got kids to take care of and all this stuff. So just learning how to slow down the pace, how to take really good care of yourself. Practicing like what I call radical self-care. So we go through a lot of practices around that. I think we have the link to join if people are interested in that. And then the other thing that I do is work with people one-on-one. And the thing that you mentioned, Ellis, around sex education, it's almost a joke the way that we offer sex education in schools. and most people's sex education is either like a don't do that message from a parent or a grandparent, or it's from porn or from TV or movies or from friends. And it's poor quality sex education. It's not, protecting people. It's not giving people good information about how to, exchange pleasure with one another. Even, just early love wounds that we get because of either, being abandoned by a parent or a caregiver, or being harmed by a parent or caregiver or something like that. We carry that into relationships. So sometimes it's two people who have been traumatized coming together in a relationship and trying to work it out. And that is challenging. So my one-on-one sessions are really around just doing the inquiry deep into the body. Where are you carrying stress and trauma? And we know that sexual repression and tension and stress causes a number of diseases. There's good evidence out there that prostate cancer, heart disease, mental illness, anxiety, depression, all these things are influenced by not being sexually well and repressing sexuality. We're all sexual beings. All of our ancestors had sex, or else we wouldn't be here. So it behooves us to learn how to have a healthy sexual relationship and really become well sexually. And that's what I really carry my clients through, and whatever other traumas they've incurred along their life journey or ancestral stuff that's been passed down. We go through all that and just kind of go into a deep dive to kind of excavate, and then bring in, a new healthy narrative and belief system. And then also just learning how to expand the pleasure capacity. A lot of us in our culture, it's like suffering, you get some kind of badge of honor or something, but fully relaxed and in pleasure is not something we're encouraged to do, and something that our ancestors may not have been afforded the luxury of. But in our generation, we can start to turn that around, and now we can thrive. We don't have to just survive. We can actually move into thriving, and that's what I love.
Well, I think this has been a really good discussion, Dr. Hilliard. To a certain extent, you come to this pretty naturally. I know your pedigree. One comes from the heart, one comes from the mind. So where you ended up is a pretty natural spot. So I do think that people who want to know more about Dr. Hilliard and her work, and more about the subjects we talked about, they can go to the AAWellnessProject.org site of the African American Wellness Project. We will have some of her videos posted there and some of her information there. And for those of you who are wanting to make the connection, I think that would be a good place to go. And
it's also scrolling across the bottom there, on the bottom of the screen there. We put her website up for Dr. Hilliard.
Right.
Great. So, and she has a group coming up in February for 6 weeks, specifically for Black women. Can't even get it out. See, but for Black women, this is a great opportunity to come together with other sisters to talk through some of your issues and being guided by Dr. Hilliard.
Is that telemedicine, or is that in person?
It's online, and it's fun too, so it's not just serious, like, oh, this happened to me. It's going to be like, we're going to bring some liveliness in there and have some fun with it.
So hopefully for those of you from any part of the country, maybe this be one of those walks with Donna, right into the counseling sessions. But I think it's a very important subject, not to minimize it. I do think that it's neglected within our community, and I do think it causes a lot more problems than people appreciate. And we thank you, Dr. Hilliard. Like I say, your pedigree comes to this pretty natural. From the heart, from the mind, you can't do it any better.
We got one question, if we could. I told Patrice, she's been on fire tonight, so I told Patrice.
Yes, Patrice.
Patrice, you need to submit a name for the show. I need you to submit a name for the show, Patrice and Lynn and our regular viewers. But Patrice said, we're hearing of increased divorces during this pandemic. Could the unresolved trauma in our bodies be causing more toxicity in already stressful situations of the pandemic?
Yeah. With this pandemic, particularly for bodies of color, across the board, this shutdown and what people have called the lockdown, it brings up trauma. This enslavement traumas or imprisonment traumas that gets kicked up whenever you're restricted. So a lot of people have struggled with just being homebound. And then if you were already kind of not getting along so great, and then now you're, shoved into close quarters with one another, plus having to homeschool kids, and there's all sorts of stresses going on there, plus just the fear for your life. You add all that into a relationship that was barely hanging on, and you can have this powder keg of stuff coming up. So I've seen a lot of people struggling with really, really, difficult emotions and just acting out because they are restricted, and so now they go out and they're doing things out of character just because they want to have some control of their lives. So yeah, this has been a really rough year for a lot of people.
Any tips for people trying to stay together during this pandemic? Any guidelines for ways that you can either even improve your relationships?
Yeah, one concept that I love to teach people is that think of three different entities. There's me, there's you, and then there's the we. And so you can think about what's best for me, what's best for you, and what's best for the we. And a lot of times it's hard for us to see outside of ourselves. But when you look at it at that, and it doesn't mean that anybody has to win or lose. It's just, if you look at all three of those entities, what's best for the we. Sometimes it doesn't even occur to people. They just like, I just want to win this argument. I don't even care, So one quick tip I can give people. And then also, because you can't go out and do the things that you used to do, try to create little things, little date nights at home and stuff like that, just to, just lighten things up a little bit rather than just like checking out in front of the TV. Try to create, nice little things you can do together, even walking around the block. Excuse me, my husband and I'll take a walk around the block a few times a week. And that's nice, just to be out and watch the sunset and, listen to the birds and feel the breeze.
Yeah, we tried getting we got a puzzle. We haven't opened it yet, but we feel that maybe something we can get together. So I'd like to thank Dr. Hilliard.
Thank you, Dr. Hilliard.
Dr. Hilliard, you have been, people are asking, so just go to her website. If you have more questions for Dr. Hilliard, join her group, go to her website, learn about it, release that toxicity from your body, learn how to pleasure yourself, your partner, and whoever you want to pleasure.
Yeah.
Dr. Hilliard can show you how to do it.
So thank you, Dr. Hilliard.
Thank you.
We want to thank Dr. Randall Morgan for sharing with us some of the issues around the vaccine and talking a bit about the clinical trials issue. For those of you who want to be heroes, I think and take one for the team. Like I say, clinical trials are a good way to kind of get started for your investing in the African American community and taking some of the mystery out of these vaccines. So thanks for Dr. Carey. It's pretty obvious that your investment in the program is going to make a big difference.
Thank you.
Most of all, I'd like to thank those of you who have come to our venue. We'll have a name at some point, but we're sponsored by the African American Wellness Project, and we want you to visit our website as well for some of the information that we didn't give here. So I want you to remember that health is your biggest asset. So protect it, and we'll talk again next week.
Absolutely. Remember, give us the names for our show right there, ellis@BlackDoctor.org. We're having a contest. Again, Dr. Donna, Dr. Mike, signing off.
It's great. Take care, everyone.